At 11 p.m., my husband, Michael, slapped me because there was no food on the table. He yelled, "Hurry up and serve dinner, you useless woman." I went in and out of the kitchen for 20 minutes without saying a word. When I returned with a covered tray, they thought it would be a delicious dish, but when the lid was opened, inside there was no food, but a one-way ticket to hell for them. The wall clock in the living room read 11:10 p.m. Outside the house, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the tires of my car brushing against the asphalt of the driveway. I felt like my whole body was going to break. I had spent the entire day at the office struggling with a pile of audit documents that had to be ready for the next morning. I felt a throbbing pain in my head, as if a hammer were repeatedly hitting me, but I forced myself to put on a slight smile, imagining the soft bed that would soon welcome me. I just wanted to take a hot shower and sleep without interruptions. I turned off the car engine and staggered towards the front door. The house keys jingled in my hand, which was trembling slightly from fatigue. As the door opened, the cold air from the air conditioner hit me directly in the face. It was strange. Normally, at this hour, the living room lights should be off, but today all the lamps were on. I suddenly had a bad feeling. My steps stopped at the threshold when I saw 3 people sitting on the living room sofa with indecipherable expressions. My husband, Michael, was sitting in the center with his legs crossed arrogantly. To his right, my mother-in-law, Susan, gave me a sharp and judgmental look, and to his left, my sister-in-law, Jessica, was playing with her phone, but occasionally she would glance at me with a mocking smile. Before I could say hello, Michael jumped up and strode towards me. His face was as red as a tomato, and his jaw was tense. Seeing the veins on his neck stand out, I knew his emotions were about to explode. "Honey, I just got home from work." Before I could finish the sentence, a hard slap landed on my left cheek. Smack. The sound was so loud it broke the silence of the living room that night. In an instant, a stinging and hot sensation spread across my face. The slap was so strong that my head turned to the side. I stood frozen on the spot. The exhaustion that until that moment had oppressed my whole body seemed to vanish in the face of the tremendous impact. My right hand, with which I held my increasingly numb cheek, was trembling. I looked at Michael, trying to find a hint of guilt in his eyes, but there was none, only a glint of fury about to explode. "Do you know what time it is, you cheap whore?" Michael shouted right in my face. His saliva splattered on my hair. "Who do you think you are to come home at this hour? What are you doing out there while your husband is waiting for you at home?" I swallowed the tears that were fighting to come out. "Honey, I've been working late. You know it's the end of the month and I'm busy. I had a lot of work. Besides, I sent you a message this afternoon," I replied in a trembling voice, but trying to remain calm. I didn't want to show weakness in front of them. Susan cut me off with a sharp voice. The middle-aged woman stood up from the sofa and pointed at my face. "What kind of wife are you? We've been here for an hour, starving. There isn't a single plate of food on the table. The pots are empty and there's only cold water in the fridge. Are you trying to starve my son on purpose, huh?" Jessica chimed in without looking up from her phone screen, as if I were less important than a social media video. "Get a grip, sister-in-law. Michael has been tired all day, resting at home. The wife should buy food on her way home from work or cook something. How can you come home empty-handed? You're useless." I looked at them one by one. Michael, my unemployed husband who lied to the neighbors, saying he had started a business after being fired 6 months ago for embezzling company funds. Susan, my mother-in-law, who demanded thousands of dollars a month from me for her expenses without lifting a single dirty plate in this house. And Jessica, my 2 5-year-old sister-in-law, whose only job was to sleep, eat, and shop online using my credit card. All of them lived off my sweat. All of them breathed under the roof of this house whose mortgage I paid every month. And now they were yelling at me because I came home late to prepare their dinner. "Go cook at once, you useless woman!" Michael yelled again. This time he pushed me roughly on the shoulder, making me stagger back until I hit the shoe rack. "Don't you dare come out of the kitchen until there's a delicious meal on the table, and it better be good or I'll throw the plates in your face." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger that was beginning to burn in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit all the rage I had been holding back. I wanted to throw them out of the house right now, but no. Acting on impulse would ruin my plan. I needed to remain calm to take my revenge in the most painful way for them, an elegant revenge they would never forget for the rest of their lives. I straightened up and fixed my messy hair. I looked Michael straight in the eye. There was no longer any trace of fear or sadness in me, only a cold, empty look. "All right," I said in a low but firm voice. "Are you hungry? Wait 20 minutes. I'll prepare a special dish for you tonight, the one you deserve the most." Without waiting for their response, I walked past Michael, ignoring Susan's mocking look and Jessica's sarcastic laugh, and went straight to the kitchen, the place where I used to spend hours serving them like a maid. But tonight would be different. Tonight, no smell of delicious food would come out of this kitchen. Tonight, this kitchen would be the place where I would cook their ruin. As soon as I got to the kitchen, I closed the door firmly. Leaning my back against it, I closed my eyes for a moment to gather my strength. The sting on my cheek persisted, but the wound in my heart was much more painful. During these 5 years of marriage, I had always tried to be a devoted wife. I turned a blind eye to Michael's laziness. I tried to understand Susan's complaints and gave in to Jessica's immature behavior. I thought that if I was patient, they would change. I was completely wrong. My patience had only fed the monster inside them. They became more and more greedy, more cruel, and more shameless. I opened my eyes. The tears I had held back before had completely dried up. It wasn't worth crying over parasites like them. I went to a drawer in a corner of the kitchen, the place where I had kept important things I had been hiding. "That's enough. This cheap drama has to end tonight." I deliberately made noise, clattering the knife and cutting board. Chop, 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 chop. The rhythm filled the kitchen and went through the walls to the living room. I knew exactly what they were thinking out there. They were probably smiling with satisfaction, thinking that I had given in again. They would think that this foolish wife was hastily chopping onions or meat to fill their demanding stomachs, scared to death. But on the kitchen counter, not a single ingredient was touched. The large knife only repeatedly hit an empty cutting board. It was part of the show. I wanted them to feel on top of the world before I made them fall into the deepest abyss. While I continued to make fake noises, my other hand was busy preparing the real dinner. I took out a large silver tray that I normally only used on special family occasions. The tray gleamed under the kitchen light. On it, I didn't place plates of food. There was no mac and cheese, no burgers, no pot roast, as they used to demand. Instead, I took out a thick envelope from a secret drawer under the sink, an envelope I had been preparing for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. I opened the envelope and took out 3 important documents from inside. First, the deed to this house. I originally bought this house with my savings, but Michael insisted that I put his name as a co-owner to feel respected as the head of the family. However, last month, after paying the last mortgage payment with my year-end bonus, I secretly started the process to transfer the ownership completely to my name. The process was complicated and expensive, but fortunately, I knew a trusted lawyer who could do the job quickly and without Michael finding out. This document was proof that every brick, every tile, and every inch of land in this house was my property. Second, the divorce petition. This document was already filed. It detailed the grounds for divorce: verbal abuse, the physical violence that had just occurred, fortunately recorded by the security camera I installed in the living room a week ago, and financial neglect. I was tired of supporting a man who only knew how to give orders. Third, a stack of bank statements as thick as a notebook. On them, I had marked with a bright highlighter all the transactions that came out of my account to maintain their lifestyle. Michael's car payments, the monthly allowance Susan used for her social gatherings, the charges on my credit card that Jessica used to buy luxury bags and shoes, and even the money for Michael's cigarettes and gas. Everything was meticulously recorded. The total sum was astronomical, enough to buy a small house in the suburbs. It was irrefutable proof that I was the head of this family, not Michael. I placed these 3 documents neatly on the tray: the deed in the center, the divorce petition on the left, and the bank statements on the right. Then I covered it with a shiny silver dome lid. Perfect. At first glance, it looked like a fancy dinner from a 5-star restaurant. I glanced at my wristwatch. Exactly 20 minutes had passed. It was time for the main show to begin. I lifted the tray with both hands. Its weight was nothing compared to the weight of the life I had been enduring, but I felt it was the most beautiful burden I had ever lifted. I took a deep breath and, with an expressionless face, kicked open the kitchen door. In the dining room, the three of them were already sitting meekly around the table. Their faces looked impatient. The silverware was already in their hands, ready to devour any food I served them. When they saw me come out with the large covered tray, Susan's eyes lit up. "That's more like it," Susan said, readjusting herself in her seat sarcastically. "A wife should be capable. Not only should she make money, but she should also prioritize the stomachs of her husband and her in-laws." Michael snorted with a sullen face that still reflected his earlier anger. "You took a long time. I hope it's as good as the time we've waited. If it's terrible, get ready to make it again." Jessica even stretched her neck. "What is it, sister-in-law? I can't smell anything from here. You didn't make instant soup, did you?" I didn't answer a word. I placed the tray in the center of the table slowly with a majestic gesture. The sound of the tray hitting the glass table made them quiet for a moment. I stood tall at the end of the table, looking at them one by one with a gaze that made Michael feel a little intimidated. He probably felt a drastic change in my aura. "Go ahead, help yourselves," I said briefly. "This is the best dish I can offer you tonight. Eat it all." Impatient, Michael reached out and roughly lifted the silver lid. The sound of the lid falling on the table echoed loudly in the eerie silence that suddenly took over the room. There was no hot steam or the smell of appetizing spices. On the tray, there was only a pile of papers. Michael's eyes widened as he saw the papers. He squinted, trying to read the letters on the top document. His face, previously red with anger, turned pale as he recognized the logo and title at the top of the document. "What? What is all this?" His voice trembled, not with anger, but with confusion and incipient panic. Susan, with her poor eyesight, snatched the thickest stack of papers. "Where's the food? Why are you giving us newspapers? Have you gone mad, Emily?" But when she saw the figures marked with a highlighter on the bank statements, her eyes widened. What is this?" Jessica, who grasped the situation faster, directly grabbed the divorce petition, glanced at it, and looked at me with her mouth open. "Michael, she wants a divorce!" she shouted hysterically. The atmosphere exploded in an instant. Michael threw the house deed he was holding on the table, stood up, and pointed at my face with a trembling finger. "Divorce petition. Who do you think you are to divorce me? You wish! And this is the house deed. Why is only your name on it? Where is mine? Have you deceived me?" I smiled, a very sweet but cold and penetrating smile. "Enjoy reality, Michael." "Susan, Jessica, fill your stomachs by looking at those figures. That's the amount of my money you've been squandering," I said, staring into Michael's eyes. "This house is mine, legally and morally. I put the original documents in a safe deposit box at the bank this morning. That's just a copy, so it's useless for you to tear it up." Then I turned my gaze to Susan, who was starting to tremble as she held the bank statements. "And from this moment on, I'm kicking all of you out of my house." "By what right do you kick us out?" shouted Susan. Her voice was so sharp it made my ears ring. "This is my son's house. Michael is the head of the family. You're just a freeloader." "Head of the family?" I chuckled, a pathetic-sounding laugh. What head of the family feeds his family with his wife's money? What head of the family allows his mother to insult his wife? "You should know, ma'am, that Michael hasn't contributed a single dollar to this house for a year. Even the electricity bill that lights up your head right now, I pay for it," Michael growled, his hands clenched into fists, as if ready to hit me again. He walked around the table and approached me. His intention to harm me was evident. "How insolent! If you don't take back what you said, What are you going to do?" I challenged him. I didn't take a step back. On the contrary, I lifted my chin, provoking him. "Hit me again." "Go ahead. The security camera in the corner upstairs has already recorded you slapping me in the living room earlier. If you lay a hand on me one more time, that recording will be automatically sent to the cloud and to my lawyer's phone. In addition to the divorce petition, do you want a bonus of a criminal complaint for domestic violence?" Michael's steps stopped short. He looked up and saw the small camera blinking with a red light in the corner of the room. His face transformed into a mixture of fear and extreme hatred. He realized he had fallen into my trap. "Get out," I said coldly, "right now." The silence my threat had created lasted only a few seconds before breaking into a deafening uproar. Susan was the first to lose her composure. The old woman, who always maintained an elegant image in front of her social club friends, was now screaming like a madwoman. With her wrinkled hands, she swept all the papers off the table, scattering them on the floor. Her face was bathed in tears, not of sadness, but of rage. She felt humiliated by the daughter-in-law she had considered a walking ATM. She couldn't accept the reality that her luxurious life would vanish in the blink of an eye. Susan repeatedly slammed the table with her palms. Her voice was broken, accusing me of being a first-class scammer. She claimed that I had manipulated Michael, that I had used some kind of trick, or that I had stolen his assets by taking advantage of her son's carelessness. The accusations sounded ridiculous to me. How could I scam Michael if he had no assets? From the spoons and forks in this house to the car in the garage, I had bought everything with the sweat of my brow. But logic no longer seemed to work for them, mired in the panic of losing their livelihood. Michael, who had been momentarily cowed by the threat of the camera, now began to wander around the dining room like a caged beast. He pulled at his hair in frustration. His eyes scanned the room frantically, as if looking for an escape to reverse the situation. He picked up the copy of the house deed scattered on the floor, crumpled it into a ball of paper, and threw it at me. The ball hit me on the shoulder without hurting me and bounced off, but it showed how helpless he felt at that moment. He realized he had no legal basis to refute me. The documents were real, the evidence of the transfers was clear, and he knew perfectly well that he had been living off my money all this time. The immature sister-in-law, Jessica, reacted differently, but just as irritatingly. Instead of screaming or making a scene, she hugged the luxury handbag she had just bought last week, of course, with my credit card, and started crying hysterically. She clung to her brother, begging him to do something. She was afraid of being homeless, of not being able to show off on social media anymore, of her friends finding out that she wasn't really rich. Her sobs gave me more of a headache, but at the same time, they gave me a strange satisfaction. At last, the girl felt afraid for her future. The same fear that always tormented me every time I saw the credit card bills inflated because of her. I let them vent their emotions for a few minutes. I stood at the end of the table with my arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle of the ruin of a family of parasites. When I thought it was enough, I walked to a corner of the room. There, behind the long window curtains, I had hidden something. I pulled out 3 large black trash bags filled to the brim. They were industrial-strength trash bags. I dragged the bags to the center of the room. The sound of the plastic rubbing against the tiled floor made them turn their heads. With all my strength, I threw the bags at them one by one. Thump, thump, thump. The 3 large bags landed exactly at their feet. Michael jumped up, startled. Susan stopped screaming, and Jessica stopped crying for a moment. They looked at the trash bags with confused expressions. A faint smell of mothballs mixed with dust emanated from the bags. "Those are your things," I said in a flat, emotionless voice. "I've already packed everything this afternoon while you were at the mall. I've put in there the clothes, pants, shoes, and personal items that I consider important. The rest of the things that I consider trash or that I bought with my money but that you don't deserve to take, I've already thrown in the dumpster out front, or I've put them aside to sell secondhand. You don't need to go up to your rooms to pack. Your rooms are already locked and I've thrown away the keys. You no longer have access to any space in this house, except for this dining room and the front door." Jessica screamed hysterically and immediately tore open one of the plastic bags. The contents spilled out. Wrinkled clothes thrown in haphazardly, a pair of shoes stacked without a box, cosmetics thrown in without a makeup bag. She cried even harder when she saw her collection of expensive clothes treated like kitchen garbage. She protested that if the clothes were folded like that, they would be ruined. But I didn't care. To me, they were just trash that I had to get out of my house as soon as possible. Susan looked at me in disbelief, as if I had just turned into a monster. She put her hand to her chest and pretended to have a heart attack. She breathed heavily, hoping I would soften and cancel the eviction. Before, this method always worked. Every time I got angry, she would pretend to be sick, and I would immediately apologize and take care of her, but this time, I just looked at her coldly. I knew the results of her last medical checkup from last month. Her heart was very healthy. The only thing that was sick was her attitude, full of envy and jealousy. Michael tried to approach me again, this time with a false, pleading tone. He lowered his voice and tried to take my hand, but I pulled it away sharply. He began to ramble about the sweet memories of our marriage, the sacred vows we once made, the rumors the neighbors would spread if we divorced. He tried to manipulate my emotions using his old weapons, compassion and fear of social shame. But he forgot that a woman's heart, repeatedly wounded, eventually hardens like a rock. There were no longer any cracks through which Michael could slip. I glanced at my wristwatch. It had been 5 minutes since I gave them the ultimatum. I took my phone out of my pocket, tapped the screen a couple of times, and showed them the screen with the emergency call button that connected to the security gate of the subdivision. I looked at Michael sternly and gave him a final, non-negotiable warning. My patience has run out and I don't want to waste any more time on this cheap drama. Take those trash bags and get out of my house right now. My order was blunt. I'll count to 10. If you're still here, I'll press this call button. The security guards of the subdivision will come and remove you by force. Imagine the shame of being dragged out like thieves in front of the neighbors. The choice is yours. You leave on your own with what little dignity you have left, or you are forcibly evicted while the whole neighborhood enjoys the free show. 1, 2, 3. Michael froze. His face was as white as a sheet. He looked for hesitation in my eyes, but found none. He saw a murderous sincerity. With trembling hands, he grabbed one of the large plastic bags. He yelled at Jessica to stop crying and help him move the things. He also helped his mother, who was still pretending to be short of breath, to get up. They finally realized I wasn't joking. The queen of the house had awakened, and her orders were absolute. The front door swung open, revealing the dense darkness of the night. A strong wind blew straight in, carrying with it raindrops that were beginning to fall heavily. Nature, as if supporting my plan to cleanse this house of filth, unleashed a sudden storm at the moment they left. In the distance, the roar of thunder could be heard, as if marking the rhythm of my heart, which was pounding with adrenaline. I stood at the threshold to make sure they really left with the trash bags containing their meager possessions. Michael went ahead with a large black plastic bag on his shoulder. He looked like a defeated man, a far cry from the arrogant husband who had slapped me. His shirt was soaked from the splashing rain, his hair was limp, and his face was tilted down to hide his anger and shame. Behind him, Jessica reluctantly dragged her plastic bag. Occasionally, she would mutter a curse under her breath when the end of the bag got caught on the parking lot floor. Susan walked unsteadily, carrying nothing. She tried to maintain what little dignity she had left by walking with her chin held high, although her body was beginning to tremble from the night wind. As soon as Susan's last foot crossed the threshold, I slammed the heavy wooden door shut. Boom! The sound of the door closing was the signal for the end of a dark chapter in my life. I immediately double-locked it and put on the security latch. I heard loud banging on the door from outside. A few seconds later, Michael was screaming my name, throwing insults that then turned into pleas. His voice was faint, drowned out by the sound of the increasingly heavy rain. I didn't move. I went to the front window and, pushing the curtain aside slightly, I peeked outside. In the yard, the three of them were shivering from the cold. The rain was falling harder and harder, soaking them in an instant. The trash bags were now soaked and looked even more miserable. Michael kept banging on the door, hoping I would soften when I saw his condition, but he was wrong. Seeing them soaked seemed to wash away the wounds in my heart. How many times had they left me alone in the rain waiting for an Uber after work, while Michael took my car to have fun with his friends? Now let them feel the cold of the rainwater to their bones. The commotion in front of my house finally caught the attention of the neighbors. The porch lights of the houses on the right and left began to turn on. Some neighbors opened their windows or came out onto their porches to see what was happening. Realizing he had an audience, Michael immediately changed his strategy. He no longer threw insults, but began to shout in a pitiful voice, trying to present himself as a victim. He shouted to the neighbors that I was a heartless wife who threw out her sick husband and mother-in-law in the middle of the night. He acted as if he were an innocent victim, hoping that the neighbors' compassion would make me open the door. "Help! Help us, please! My wife has gone crazy. My mother has a heart condition. Don't let us die out here," Michael shouted, pointing at the house door. Susan, with her strong dramatic instinct, immediately collapsed on the wet porch floor and pretended to faint. Jessica also sat down next to her and began to shake her mother's body while crying loudly, creating a dramatic scene. Some neighbors began to murmur. I saw the president of the Homeowners Association, who lived 3 houses down, approaching with an umbrella. I knew I couldn't let Michael distort the facts. I picked up my phone and called the subdivision's security gate. After 2 rings, I heard the deep voice of the head of security, Mr. Johnson. I asked Mr. Johnson and his team to come to my house immediately because there was a disturbance that was disrupting public order. I explained to them that some strangers were making a scene on my porch and disturbing the peace of the neighbors. Shortly after, 2 patrol cars appeared with their blue lights flashing. Mr. Johnson and 2 of his men got out quickly. They approached the porch, where the drama of Michael's family was in full swing. I gathered my courage to open the door just enough to speak to Mr. Johnson, without Michael being able to enter. "Mr. Johnson, please control these people," I said loudly so that my voice could be heard over the rain and reach the gossiping neighbors. "These people are no longer residents of this house. We have separated, and this house is my exclusive property, as stated in the property registry. They are trying to enter by force and are making a scene that is disturbing the neighbors. Please escort them out of the subdivision." Michael was speechless. He tried to defend himself to Mr. Johnson. "Sir, this is my house. My wife is upset right now. Don't listen to her." But Mr. Johnson was a professional security guard who had been working here for a long time. He knew perfectly well who promptly paid the monthly community fees and the common electricity. It was me, not Michael. He had also seen Michael come home drunk many times, or bring friends over and throw noisy parties that led to complaints from the neighbors. Mr. Johnson's sympathy was clearly not with Michael. "I'm sorry, sir. Emily is the legal owner of this house and has requested that you leave. Please do not disturb the neighbors at this hour of rest," Mr. Johnson said firmly, grabbing Michael by the arm. "We will escort you to the main entrance." Michael tried to resist, but the strength of the 2 sturdy security guards was much greater. Susan, who had been pretending to be fainted, suddenly regained consciousness and stood up, fearing that the guards would forcibly remove her. They were escorted out of the yard like prisoners. Michael's face was now red with shame for being the spectacle of the neighbors who looked at him with contempt. His performance as an aggrieved husband had completely failed. When they reached the street gate, Michael suddenly stopped as if he remembered something. He turned around and shouted at me, who was still at the threshold. "The car keys! Where are the car keys? My wallet and the car keys are still inside. Throw me the keys, at least let me take the car." I smiled sideways and slowly shook my head. I moved forward a little so he could see my face clearly under the porch light. "The car? What car are you talking about, Michael?" "The black SUV," I exclaimed, feigning innocence. "In case you didn't know, that car is in my name. And I paid the last installment last month with my bonus, so it's my car. I've hidden the keys in a place where you'll never find them. You don't have a single bit of right to that car. But I need the car." "Where do you want us to go in this rain?" Michael shouted in frustration. His voice broke between the claps of thunder. "That's no longer my business," I replied coldly. "Walk. It will do you good to exercise, you've hardly moved lately. Or call a cab. Oh, I forgot, you left your wallet inside, and all the credit cards in that wallet are linked to my accounts, which I canceled from the app 5 minutes ago. So it's useless for you to have that wallet." Michael was speechless. His face was as white as cotton. He realized how perfect his ruin was that night. Without a house, without a car, and without a single penny. Mr. Johnson motioned for his men to keep moving them away. "That's enough, sir, let's go." "Don't bother Emily anymore," the guard reprimanded Michael. Susan and Jessica finally accepted that they were being kicked out of the luxurious house where they had lived like parasites. They staggered under the pouring rain, dragging the black trash bags that were now their only possession. I closed the door again and bolted it. Outside, the rain continued to beat down hard, but here, inside my house, the atmosphere felt so peaceful and warm. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had truly come home. I felt a heavy burden that had been weighing on my shoulders disappear completely. I leaned my back against the door. I sighed deeply and smiled. Tonight I would sleep peacefully, very peacefully. The gate of the luxurious subdivision closed firmly behind them, like a dividing wall between the comfortable life they had just left and the hellish world that now awaited them. The rain did not let up. On the contrary, it intensified with even greater fury, accompanied by an icy wind that chilled to the bone. Michael, Susan, and Jessica stood trembling on the empty sidewalk. The only roof protecting them from the rain were the leafy street trees that let even more drops fall. The three of them looked like sewer rats swept away by the current, wet, dirty, and miserable. The black trash bags, which had become their only possession, felt increasingly heavy as rainwater seeped through the poorly tied openings. They walked aimlessly along the flooded sidewalk. The dim light of the street lamps illuminated their desperate faces. Michael checked his pants pockets over and over, hoping for a miracle in the form of a forgotten bill or a debit card that had been saved. But no luck. His pockets were empty. His expensive leather wallet, which contained his ID, his driver's license, his debit and credit cards, had been left on the nightstand in the bedroom. I had calculated everything meticulously. Without that wallet, Michael was nobody. He couldn't rent a hotel room, nor buy food, not even a hot tea from a street vendor. His identity and his financial access were now locked in the house that was forbidden to him. Susan began to become delirious from the cold. Her teeth chattered, and her lips began to turn blue. The woman, who always maintained an impeccable appearance with thick makeup, now looked old and frail. The remnants of makeup, streaked by the rain, had left black smudges under her eyes, giving her a grotesque appearance. In a broken voice that could barely be heard over the rain, she blamed Michael. She cursed her son's stupidity for not having known how to control his wife. According to Susan's twisted logic, all this had not happened because they had oppressed me for years, but because Michael had not been strict enough with me. Jessica limped behind. One of the heels of her high heels had broken when she fell into a pothole on the sidewalk. Now she had no choice but to limp, with the expensive, now useless, shoes in her hand. They finally found a storefront with an awning wide enough to shelter from the rain, although the store was closed. Without a word, they dropped their exhausted bodies onto the cold, dusty tile floor. Michael leaned against the cold metal shutter. His stomach rumbled loudly. Hunger began to attack cruelly. The last time they had eaten was at lunch, and tonight they were expecting the feast that I had prepared for them. Ironically, they received an unforgettable dinner. Although it was not food that could be chewed, the illusion of a hot meal now floated before Michael's eyes, slowly torturing him. Jessica, who took out her phone with a slightly cracked screen, tried to call a ride-sharing service with the remaining 10% of her battery, but her fingers stopped on the screen. She realized that the payment method for the app was directly linked to my credit card. With trembling hands, she tried to make the reservation and, as expected, a failed transaction notification appeared on the screen. I had blocked everything. Jessica called her high society friends for help. The first call went unanswered. The second was rejected. The third call was answered by a friend, Sasha. But as soon as Jessica told her that she had been kicked out of her house and needed to borrow money, Sasha made an excuse about having a bad signal and hung up. Frustrated, Jessica threw her phone on the ground, hugged her knees, and cried bitterly. That night was terribly long and painful. They couldn't sleep a wink. Mosquitoes began to bite their damp skin. Every now and then, they would be startled by the sound of a passing car. Every time a luxury car passed, Michael's heart sank. He remembered his black SUV, which was now resting comfortably in my garage. In the silence of the night, as dawn approached, Susan moaned, clutching her stomach, which was twisting from indigestion and hunger. There were no medicines, no blankets, no hot water. Michael could only look at his mother with an empty gaze. Guilt began to surface, but his huge ego immediately pushed it away and replaced it with hatred for me. He swore to take revenge as soon as the sun rose. The morning brought a radiant sun, but it did not warm their hearts. Their bodies were stiff and ached in every joint. A musty smell emanated from their dry clothes. Passers-by looked at them with disgust, considering them the new homeless people in the area. A shopkeeper who came to open his store shooed them away abruptly, throwing a bucket of water at their feet to make them move. With what little dignity they had left, they moved their belongings to a park bench not far away. While they were sitting on the park bench, enduring the growing hunger, Jessica distractedly opened social media with the little data she had left. Her eyes widened when she saw an Instagram story from me that had just been posted 15 minutes ago. Jessica showed the phone screen to Michael and Susan. On the screen, with the background of a dining table in a clean and elegant apartment, was a photo of a bowl of a special chicken soup with abundant ingredients and a cup of hot tea. In a corner of the photo was a small text that read, "The best breakfast is a breakfast without parasites, a blessing to be grateful for." Seeing the photo, Michael's stomach churned violently, not only from hunger, but from the envy and rage that exploded in his chest. While they suffered on the street like garbage, I was enjoying my life. The reality without my wallet was terrible. The world was no longer kind, and they were nothing more than worthless dust. Michael decided he couldn't give up like this. He still had a job. Yes, he was still the head of the marketing team at an office supply distribution company, although his position was not very important and his salary was tight, which he often squandered on small online bets he made behind my back. He thought that if he could get to the office, he could ask for an advance from the company or borrow money from a colleague to at least get a cheap room for his mother and sister. He had to save the last shred of prestige he had left as a man. He left Susan and Jessica in the park, promising to return at lunchtime with money and food. On an adventure, Michael walked 2 miles to his office. He stopped by a public restroom to wash his face and fix his disheveled hair. He couldn't get rid of the musty smell from his very wrinkled shirt, but at least he cleaned his muddy shoes with a wet paper towel. His appearance was too pitiful for a team leader, but he had no other choice. Upon arriving at the office lobby, the receptionist looked at him with a frown. Normally, Michael went to work in impeccable clothes, expensive perfume, and an elegant style that I had helped him create. Today he looked like he had just survived a natural disaster. Michael ignored the strange look and went straight to the elevator. Inside the elevator, 2 employees from another department discreetly covered their noses and whispered something to each other while glancing at Michael. Michael pretended not to see them and looked straight ahead with an impassive face. His heart was pounding. He was afraid that the secret of his poverty would be discovered. As soon as he reached his desk, before he could sit down, an employee from Human Resources was standing there with a serious face. "Mr. Miller, the director and the head of HR are waiting for you right now in the meeting room," the employee said without smiling. Michael's mood instantly soured. Normally, these sudden calls were not a good sign. With hesitant steps, he followed the employee to the meeting room at the end of the hall. Inside the meeting room, the director and the head of HR were waiting for him with a pile of documents on the table. Their faces were cold and showed no kindness. Michael sat in the indicated chair and, although his lips were trembling, he tried to force a friendly smile. "What's going on, Mr. Director?" "Mr. Head of HR, are you calling me so urgently in the morning?" he asked, playing dumb. The director threw a blue folder at Michael. "No excuses are necessary. We've been conducting an internal audit for a week and have found numerous irregularities in the financial reports of the marketing team you lead." Michael's heart seemed to stop. With sweaty hands, he opened the folder. Inside was evidence of embezzlement of operating funds, falsification of gas receipts, and even inflated expenses for meals with clients that never existed. All this time, Michael had been slowly siphoning money from the company to cover his personal expenses or pay his gambling debts. Before, whenever there was a cash discrepancy, I, who worked as a certified public accountant at a prestigious accounting firm that was the external audit consultant for this company, would fix the reports for him, or even cover the deficit with my own money to protect my husband's career. I had done it to save my husband's face, but now that protective shield was gone, I no longer covered up the skeletons Michael hid. On the contrary, perhaps I was the one who gave the signal to the internal audit team to investigate Michael's department more thoroughly. This, can I explain, Mr. Director? It's just a clerical error. Michael excused himself nervously. Cold sweat began to run down his temples. A clerical error? The head of HR snorted. $50,000 has disappeared in 6 months, and you call that a clerical error? We've checked with the restaurants and gas stations you attached. All these receipts are fake. And what's worse, we've also received information that you've been using company materials for personal purposes. Mr. Miller, the director interrupted with a loud, firm voice. The company cannot tolerate this type of criminal behavior. As of today, you are fired with dishonor. You will not be paid a single cent of severance because the company's losses are greater than what you are owed. And one more thing, if you do not return that $50,000 within 48 hours, we will take this case through legal channels. The police will come for you. Michael's world collapsed in an instant. Fired with dishonor, no severance, threat of jail time. He slumped in his chair. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. It was over. His only lifeline had just been broken. He tried to plead. He even knelt at the director's feet and cried, forgetting his pride, but the decision was firm. They called 2 security guards to remove Michael from the building. The scene of the expulsion from the previous night was repeated. This time, at his workplace, Michael was dragged between the desks of his colleagues, who looked at him with a mixture of surprise and disgust. The murmurs were loud. The news of his corruption spread like wildfire. He was forced to put his personal belongings in a cardboard box. He didn't have many valuable things at his desk, just a photo of himself posing as if he were a successful man. As Michael left the lobby of the office building with the box in his hands, his eyes caught an image that squeezed his chest and made it hard to breathe. A luxurious silver sedan pulled up right in front of the VIP lobby of the building next door, a much more prestigious business center. The car door opened and the figure of a woman he knew very well appeared. It was me, but this me looked very different. I was wearing an elegant, modernly designed business suit. My hair was impeccably styled, and I wore sunglasses that gave me a very distinguished air. I walked with confidence, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying work briefcases. I was going to a meeting with an important client. My career was on the rise. Michael wanted to shout my name. He wanted to run to me, but his feet felt as heavy as if they were nailed to the ground. He saw his reflection in the building's glass, disheveled, dirty, smelly, and holding an old box. In contrast, I shone like a newly cleaned diamond from the mud. At that moment, I glanced in his direction. Behind those dark sunglasses, Michael felt a sharp, penetrating gaze. I didn't stop. I didn't greet him. I didn't even show an expression of surprise. I simply turned my head and continued on my way to the skyscraper, leaving Michael rooted like a real loser on the hot sidewalk. The collapse of Michael's career was the piece that perfectly completed his suffering, while the woman he had abandoned now flew so high that she was unreachable. Michael returned to the park with heavy steps, as if carrying a ton weight on his feet. The midday sun was scorching and burned the back of his neck, unprotected by the collar of his already dirty and sweat-smelling shirt. In his hands, he tightly clutched the box with his personal belongings from the office, a symbol of his failure that he would now have to carry everywhere. During the journey, his stomach wouldn't stop rumbling, twisting in pain and begging to be filled. But that hunger was nothing compared to the fear that now gripped his throat. He had to face his mother and sister with no money, no food, and, worst of all, with the news that he was now an unemployed man with a criminal record at his company. When he arrived at the park, he was met with a miserable scene. Susan and Jessica were huddled on a park bench with peeling paint. They looked like withered plants, as if they had been forcibly torn from the earth. Susan was massaging her swollen legs while Jessica fanned her face with a piece of torn cardboard, with an expression of bad humor and annoyance. When they saw Michael appear in the distance, their faces lit up for a moment. The hope of a sandwich and fresh water shone clearly in their eyes. Jessica even forgot the pain in her legs and stood up to greet her brother, extending her hands as if asking for her share. But that hope vanished when Michael arrived in front of them and dropped the box he was carrying to the ground with a dull, miserable thud. Michael didn't dare to look them in the eye. He lowered his head and looked at his shoes, once shiny but now covered in street dust. In a choked voice, Michael confessed everything. He told them about his dismissal, the company audit that had revealed his irregularities, the threat of going to jail if he didn't return the money, and the fact that he hadn't received a single penny of severance. For a moment, a deathly silence fell over the three of them, in contrast to the noisy traffic on the road behind the park. And then the crying and rage erupted. Susan screamed hysterically, not caring about the people passing by in the park. She hit Michael's arm with the little strength she had left, blaming her proud son for being so careless and stupid. She lamented her fate, of having to be homeless at her age, comparing her life to that of her friends from the social gatherings, who at that hour were probably taking a nap in a room with air conditioning. Insults without filter came out of Susan's mouth. The same harsh words she used to direct at me, she now vomited them all over Michael. Jessica was no less cruel. She kicked the box with Michael's things, causing the contents to spill. She insulted her brother, calling him a useless man who only brought trouble to the family. In this desperate situation, the mask of a united family that they had so boasted about to me completely crumbled. There was no longer any affection or mutual support, only the selfish survival instinct of each individual. They blamed each other for the sudden poverty that had befallen them. Jessica blamed Michael for embezzling funds. Michael blamed Jessica and Susan for pushing him to embezzle with their lavish lifestyle. And Susan blamed both of them for not having found rich spouses to take care of their lives. When the fight, which had left them exhausted and even hungrier, subsided, Michael made a desperate decision. He took off the luxury watch he wore on his wrist, the only valuable item he had left and that I had not confiscated because he was wearing it when I kicked them out. He also forcefully demanded the gold earrings Jessica was wearing. Although Jessica resisted and shouted no, Michael and Susan forced her with the excuse that it was to buy food and rent a cheap room. Finally, with a face of anger and resentment, Jessica handed over the earrings. Michael went to a pawn shop some distance from the park and sold the watch and earrings. Since he didn't have the certificate of authenticity and needed the money urgently, the items were sold for a price much lower than their original value. Michael had no choice but to accept an amount of cash sufficient for a few simple meals for a few days and to rent a narrow room in a dirty neighborhood for a week. That afternoon, they rented a room by the day in a narrow, muddy alley that smelled of sewage. The room was very small, barely fitting a thin foam mattress that was sunken in the middle. The walls were damp and moldy, and there were no windows, only a small vent above the door. The bathroom was outside and shared with other tenants who looked at them with suspicion. For Susan and Jessica, accustomed to my fragrant and clean, luxurious house, this place was hell. Susan constantly complained about the musty smell, the cockroaches that scurried by, the hot air with only a small, dusty fan. That night they had set meals they bought from a shabby restaurant. The atmosphere at dinner was gloomy, with no conversation. They ate greedily because they were hungry, but their faces were full of mutual hatred. After dinner, Michael kept the remaining money from the sale of the watch and earrings under his pillow with the intention of keeping it safe. He planned to use that money as capital to look for odd jobs the next day. The physical and mental exhaustion caused Michael and Susan to fall asleep quickly on the thin mattress, snoring. However, Jessica did not sleep. Her eyes stared at the ceiling of the room, full of cobwebs. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She looked with disgust at her mother and brother, who were sleeping with their mouths open. She felt that she did not deserve to be in this dirty place. She thought that she was still young, beautiful, and deserved to live comfortably. She hated Michael for not being a support and felt the weight of having to take care of her mother, who was beginning to fall ill from stress. A demonic whisper began to infiltrate her mind. If she stayed with them, the money would run out in a week and they would starve to death together. But if she kept the money for herself, maybe she could run away to another city, find an old friend, or another man to take advantage of. Slowly, with very careful movements so as not to make the mattress creak, Jessica slipped her hand under Michael's pillow, Her heart was pounding. She felt the envelope with the money. She pulled it out slowly. Michael moved slightly in his sleep, and Jessica froze in fear. But Michael just changed his position and started snoring again. Jessica managed to get the envelope. She immediately put it in her purse and silently packed her clothes into the black plastic bag. Without looking back at her mother and brother, who had betrayed her, Jessica slipped out of the room and disappeared into the darkness of the narrow alley, taking the family's only hope of survival with her. The next morning, Michael's scream broke the silence of that dirty alley. He woke up to find that there was nothing under his pillow. The money was gone. He looked around. Jessica and her things were also gone. Susan woke up, startled by Michael's scream. When Michael told her that Jessica had run away with all their money, Susan at first did not believe it. She refused, saying that her beloved daughter could not be so cruel. But the truth was evident. The door was not forced and there were no signs of a break-in. It was clearly someone from inside. Susan burst into tears. This time, her crying was truly heartbroken. She screamed Jessica's name, the daughter she had always spoiled, the daughter who now abandoned her like trash to save herself. Michael, with his emotions at their limit, became enraged. He punched the damp wall of the room with his fist, drawing blood on his hand. He cursed Jessica with harsh words. The pain of being betrayed by his own blood was much more painful than being kicked out by his wife. At least I had a clear reason to hate them, but Jessica was part of them. Now it was a parasite eating another parasite. Their ruin was even more complete when the landlord came knocking on the door. He was angry that the early morning commotion was disturbing the other neighbors. Seeing Michael out of his mind, the landlord got scared and kicked them out immediately. The week's rent had been stolen by Jessica, and it turned out that Michael had not yet paid it in full. He had only given a deposit the night before. They were kicked out again. This time they had absolutely nothing left, absolute zero. Susan walked unsteadily with a lost look in her eyes. The severe shock from her daughter's betrayal caused her health to deteriorate drastically. Her face was pale, and she was sweating coldly. Michael had to support his mother as they walked down the hot street. In the midst of extreme desperation, Michael remembered the only place that was once his home. A foolish hope arose in his mind that maybe I had already calmed down. Maybe I would feel compassion seeing his mother's condition, who looked like a walking dead. With the last of his strength, Michael took his mother and walked several miles to the luxurious subdivision where I lived. When they arrived, the sun was about to set. They looked like beggars. The security guard of the subdivision who was guarding the main entrance recognized them and looked at them with suspicion. But Michael pleaded with him, saying that he would not enter, that he just wanted to see the house from afar. Michael stood on the other side of the street, in front of his old house. The house looked dark and silent. My car was not in the garage. The yard was clean and the lawn was manicured. But there was one thing that made Michael's knees weak instantly. In front of the house fence was a large sign nailed, a striking red and white sign with large letters that said, "For sale." Michael's hope was shattered. I had not only kicked them out, but I was selling the house full of memories to erase any trace of them from my life. The house was empty. I had gone somewhere, taking my success and happiness with me, leaving Michael and his mother truly alone in this cruel world. Michael collapsed on the asphalt and, hugging his mother's knees, cried silently in the shadow of the house he had once abandoned. For me, the days following the expulsion of Michael and his family were days filled with a healing silence. There were no more morning screams for coffee, no more loud TV noise with Susan's favorite drama, and no more complaints that the food was too salty or the clothes weren't ironed properly. The house became so quiet, that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of the wind blowing in the backyard trees. At first, that silence seemed strange to me, but little by little it became a comforting blanket that I had missed for the last 5 years. The first step I took to get my life in order was to clean the house. Literally and figuratively, I hired a professional cleaning company to clean every corner of the house, throw away any of Michael's belongings that might have been left behind, and replace the sheets, curtains, and even the carpets that the family had stepped on. I wanted to erase their footprints and their smell, the smell of Michael's cigarettes and Susan's cloying perfume from my sacred space. After the house was clean, I immediately contacted a trusted real estate agent. I decided to sell the house. Although the house was the fruit of my sweat and tears, its walls held too many bad memories. I needed a completely new start in a place where there were no memories of slaps or insults. The process of selling the house was quick. Its good location and good condition made many potential buyers interested. In 2 weeks, the house was sold for a satisfactory price. With the money from the sale of the house, plus my savings, which were now intact as they were not being devoured by parasites, I bought a penthouse in the city center. The apartment was smaller than the old house, but much more luxurious, modern, and with a very strict security system. From the windows of my 30th floor apartment, I could see the flickering city lights at night, a landscape that symbolized my bright future. My career also took off like a rocket. Without the headaches and drama that consumed my emotions, I could focus 100% on my work. The large audit project I was leading was completed with excellent results, long before the deadline. The client was very satisfied with my meticulous and professional work. The head of the accounting firm did not hesitate to promote me to senior partner. This promotion brought with it new benefits: a more luxurious company car, a personal assistant, and of course, a much higher income. I now looked different. I changed my style of dress. The old dresses I used to wear for fear that Michael would get angry if I bought new clothes, I now donated. I filled my new wardrobe with elegant business suits from famous designers. My face, once tired and dull, now shone thanks to regular care and, most importantly, a happy heart. My office colleagues often told me that after my divorce, I looked 10 years younger. For me, the divorce was not a shame or a failure, but an operation to remove a malignant tumor that had saved my life. The divorce process in family court was much simpler than I had imagined. Since Michael did not have a fixed address and did not appear for any of the court summons, the judge issued a default judgment. The judgment was rendered in the absence of the defendant. I officially became a divorced woman in a short time. When the judge's gavel struck, I did not cry. On the contrary, I smiled in relief and gave thanks in my heart several times. I left the courthouse with a light step, as if the chains that had bound my feet had been broken. That night, in my new apartment with the scent of lavender, I sat comfortably on the imported leather sofa and enjoyed a cup of hot herbal tea. While reading a bestseller, my phone vibrated on the marble table. I received a message from an unknown number. Normally, I ignored messages from unknown numbers, but for some reason, my intuition told me to open the message. The content of the message was short, but full of desperation. "Emily, it's Michael. I borrowed someone else's phone at a store. Please, Emily, Susan is very sick. We are sleeping under the awning of a store. Jessica ran away with our money. I feel like I'm going to die if this continues. I will change, I promise you. Please, let us come back. Do you still have a little love left for me?" I read the message with an expressionless face. I felt no compassion or desire to help. The only thing I felt was disgust and a slight irritation at having my peace disturbed. I remembered the time Michael left me alone at home with a high fever and went fishing with his friends. I remembered the time Susan threw my food in the trash just because the seasoning was too mild. I remembered Michael's last slap, love. That love had been murdered several times by their actions. I slowly put down the teacup. I did not reply to the message with words of anger or wise advice. Michael no longer deserved my emotional energy. For me, Michael was a closed past, a closed and burned book. With firm fingers, I pressed the block button for that number and then deleted the message from my inbox so that there would be no digital trash to dirty my phone. I stood up and walked to the large window that showed the city's urban landscape at night. I saw the thousands of lights shining below. I imagined that in some dark corner of that city, Michael might be crying, lamenting his fate. But that was no longer my business. Every adult is responsible for their own decisions in life. Michael chose to be a slacker and an oppressor when he had everything, so now he had to face the consequences of being a loser when he had lost everything. I took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air of freedom. I felt whole, complete, and strong. I realized that I did not need a man to be happy. Happiness was within myself, in my ability to stand on my own 2 feet, in my quiet life, and in the legitimate income I sought. That night I slept very peacefully in my soft king-sized bed, wrapped in a soft silk comforter. There were no more nightmares or fear of tomorrow. I knew that tomorrow's sun would rise brighter, illuminating the path of my new life, clean of parasites, the path to the true happiness I had created for myself. I had managed to turn pain into strength, and my best revenge was to become such a successful and happy woman that the existence of her betrayers no longer mattered to me. 1 year later, a luxurious banquet hall in the city center was beautifully decorated. Fresh flowers adorned every corner. The chandeliers hung majestically, emitting a golden light. Outside the building, dozens of congratulatory wreaths, sent by several large companies and local officials, were lined up. Today was the launch of the charitable foundation I had created to help women victims of domestic violence and promote the economic independence of vulnerable groups. I, on a small stage, cut the opening ribbon with a sincere and charming smile. I wore an elegant, long dress of simple design, which radiated a quiet luxury. My hair was impeccably styled and my face, clear and carefree, shone. The flashes of the journalists' cameras did not stop capturing the image of the woman who was now an inspiration to many. I was no longer an oppressed and fearful woman. I was a symbol of rebirth and success. After the official ceremony, the social contribution activities continued. My team and I prepared 1,000 luxurious boxed lunches and cash aid to be distributed among the poor who had gathered in the side yard of the building. I insisted on distributing the gifts myself. I wanted to see the faces of the beneficiaries, share a smile, and be grateful for the abundant blessings in my life after the storm had passed. The long line of people who wanted to receive help stretched out in an orderly fashion. I patiently shook hands with each one, gave them the lunchbox and the envelope, and offered a word of encouragement. The smell of sweat and dust from the people in the line did not bother me. I continued to smile kindly and my eyes radiated affection. Finally, it was the turn of an emaciated man pushing an old wheelchair. The man was wearing a t-shirt with holes in the shoulders and pants dirty with grime. His body was just skin and bones. His hair was long, messy, and greasy. A pungent smell emanated from his body, a mixture of garbage and stale sweat from not having seen soap in a long time. In the rickety wheelchair he was pushing sat an old woman in a much worse state. The woman was emaciated. Her hair was white and messy, her gaze was empty, and her mouth constantly mumbled without sound. I took a lunch box and an envelope and with a kind smile offered them to the man. "Here you go, sir. I hope this is a blessing for you and your mother," I said in my characteristic soft voice. The man did not take the lunchbox immediately. His dirty, trembling hands stopped in midair. He lowered his head. His eyes were fixed on the high-heeled shoes I was wearing. Those shoes. He remembered seeing that style of shoe in a magazine I used to read. Slowly the man raised his head. His sunken eyes met my bright eyes. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. The man's mouth opened slightly. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed bitter saliva. Tears immediately filled his cloudy eyes. He recognized that face. The face he had once slapped. The face he had once insulted daily. The face he had once abandoned for his pride. It was me, his wife. The wife who had once served him with all her heart. The wife who had once washed his clothes. The wife who had once taken care of his life. Emily? The man's voice came out so weak it was barely a whisper. I was speechless for a moment. I looked closely at the man in front of me. I saw those eyes, that nose, and that outline of the face. Although covered in dirt and suffering, I recognized who that man was. It was Michael. And the old woman in the wheelchair was Susan. My ex-husband and my ex-mother-in-law were now in front of me as beggars, waiting for my charity. My heart beat calmly. There was no outburst of anger or a burning desire for revenge, nor a compassion that made me cry. Only a flat, empty, and strange feeling, as if I were seeing a stranger with no history in my life. Hatred required energy, and I no longer wanted to waste my energy on them. They had already become an irrelevant past. Michael waited for my reaction. He expected me to get angry, to insult him, or to cry with compassion and hug him. He hoped that there was even a little bit of feeling left. Michael wanted to prostrate himself and plead. He wanted to shout that he was sorry. He wanted to tell me how shattered his life was without me. He wanted to tell me that he regretted it so much, a regret that had burned him every moment of this year. But I did none of that. I simply nodded politely. My professional smile did not change an iota. I placed the lunchbox and the envelope in Michael's trembling hand and calmly directed my gaze to the next person in line. "Please move along, sir. The line is still long behind you," I said softly, but firmly, as if speaking to a stranger who was blocking the way. Michael's heart shattered, more shattered than when he was kicked out of the house. My indifference was the most painful punishment. He was treated as if he did not exist. He was considered like the passing wind. I had completely erased him, not only from my life, but also from my memory. I had won completely. I had closed the book of my past and burned it to ashes. A security guard approached and politely asked Michael to move quickly as he was blocking the line. Michael, with hesitant steps, pushed his mother's wheelchair and moved away. Susan, who understood nothing, only reached out for the lunchbox that was on Michael's lap. Hungry. Michael stopped on the sidewalk, on the other side of the luxurious building. He knelt beside his mother's wheelchair. In the distance, he saw me get into a gleaming black luxury sedan. A personal chauffeur opened the door for me. I got into the car elegantly, without looking back in Michael's direction even once. The car moved slowly, leaving a slight trail of smoke, taking me to my glamorous life full of happiness. Michael, with trembling hands, opened the lunchbox. Inside was white rice, stewed ribs, grilled chicken, and fresh vegetables. It was the most luxurious meal he had seen in a year. He gave a spoonful of rice to his mother, who immediately chewed it greedily, and then Michael served himself a spoonful. The food tasted delicious. It was the best catering food, but on Michael's tongue it tasted like a mixture with the salty tears that ran down his cheeks. He cried bitterly, becoming a spectacle on the crowded sidewalk. He hugged the lunchbox that his ex-wife had given him tightly, as if it were the only bond he had left. The regret came too late, much too late. He had thrown away a diamond for a sharp stone, and now that stone was wounding him until he was numb. There was no turning back. The door of forgiveness was closed, not because it was locked, but because the owner of the house had moved to a much more beautiful palace. The story of their lives ends here, at very different points. I flew high on the wings of sincerity and effort, while Michael and his family sank into the quagmire they had created for themselves. That day, an absolute truth was demonstrated. The best revenge is not anger or insults, but being so happy, so successful, and so peaceful that the existence of the people who once hurt you no longer matters. Their ruin is just a small footnote in your thick success story.